Hello guys and welcome to the video. Here we will go over everything you need to know about the current situation surrounding immigration from South Africa to the US. We will discuss the policy and how it affects South Africans and its international implications. Stick around to the end of the video to see how to apply for immigration as well as all you need to know before you make that decision. In early 2025, the US government, under President Donald Trump's administration, implemented a policy granting refugee status to a select group of South Africans, primarily white Afrikaners. This decision was framed as a response to alleged racial persecution linked to South Africa's land reform initiatives, notably the Expropriation Act of 2024. The Expropriation Act permits the South African government to obtain land without compensation under specific conditions, such as when land is unused or abandoned, or in cases involving state-owned property. The legislation aims to address historical land disparities stemming from apartheid and colonialism. Importantly, the law stipulates that expropriations must serve the public interest and are subject to judicial oversight. To date, no land has been expropriated under this specific act. On February 7, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order titled Addressing Egregious Actions of the Republic of South Africa. This order suspended U.S. aid to South Africa and directed the resettlement of Afrikaner refugees, citing concerns over government-sponsored race-based discrimination, including land expropriation without compensation. Subsequently, the U.S. granted P1 refugee status to 54 Afrikaners, a designation typically reserved for individuals facing urgent humanitarian crises. These individuals are scheduled to arrive in the United States in May 2025 and have already departed with resettlement plans in various states, including Minnesota, Idaho, and Alabama. The administration indicated that this group represents the initial phase of a broader relocation effort. This development has added strain to US-South Africa relations. In addition to suspending aid, the US declared South Africa's ambassador persona non grata, escalating diplomatic tensions. The situation has sparked debates about the intersection of domestic policies, international relations, and the role of misinformation in shaping foreign policy decisions. Officials from the South African government have strongly refuted claims of racial persecution against Afrikaners, emphasizing that the Expropriation Act is a constitutional measure aimed at redressing historical injustices. They have criticized the U.S. actions as politically motivated and based on misinformation. Analysts have pointed out the inconsistency of the U.S. refugee policy, noting that while refugee admissions from other regions remain restricted, the administration has prioritized a specific group aligned with its political base. Meaning once they become citizens, they will vote. And if they vote, they will more than likely vote for Trump. Concerns have been raised about the potential for such policies to undermine the broader principles of humanitarian assistance. Many U.S. citizens have vented their frustrations with President Trump and how he's handled this situation. Some have voiced concerns over the current issues that Trump is ignoring, citing all the benefits these refugees would receive that are funded using U.S. taxpayer money. Reactions within the Afrikaner community are varied. While some individuals and advocacy groups, such as our Free Forum, have welcomed the opportunity for resettlement, others have expressed a desire to remain in South Africa and contribute to its future. In 2024, the United States provided approximately $453 million, which is around 8.5 billion rand, in direct funding to South Africa under the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief or PEPFAR, with a further projected 8.2 billion rand allocated for 2025. Additionally, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, invested nearly $60 million in initiatives addressing climate change, gender equality, violence prevention, and democratic principles. The suspension of this aid is expected to strain South Africa's health sector and various development programs, potentially leading to job losses and reduced public services. The announcement of the aid suspension led to immediate market reactions. Earlier in the year, the rand fell by 2% against the US dollar, and the cost of insuring South African debt reached its highest level since August of the previous year. Analysts from Investec have outlined two likely scenarios for the rand's performance. Scenario 1, base case scenario, 50% probability. The rand is expected to stabilize and strengthen towards 18 rand to the dollar by the end of 2025, assuming modest economic growth and successful implementation of domestic policy reforms. Scenario 2, light down scenario, 32% probability. If political instability persists, infrastructure constraints worsen, and limited expropriation without compensation occurs, the rand could weaken to historic lows, reaching 20 rand and 50 cents to the dollar by the end of 2025. As of early May 2025, the rand is trading around 18 rand and 50 cents to the dollar, with expectations to remain within the 18 to 19 rand range, barring significant changes in US-South Africa relations. The US policy has the potential to impact South Africa in several profound ways, both immediately and over the long term. These impacts span the economy, politics, race relations, international diplomacy, and national identity. This policy will cause a ripple effect all the way from the country's farms to the rand itself. Allow me to explain. This act negatively impacts agriculture and food security. Some Afrikaner farmers manage a significant portion of commercial farms and play a vital role in food production and exports. Their exit could destabilize the agricultural sector and increase food prices. The critical loss of skills and capital can occur. Afrikaners make up a significant portion of South Africa's skilled labor force, particularly in agriculture, engineering, education, and small business sectors. There will be a brain drain, loss of technical and managerial skills. This is particularly important, especially for those individuals who play a pivotal role in agricultural development and job creation in small and rural communities in South Africa. The impact of capital flight. Immigrants often transfer wealth out of the country, reducing domestic investment and investor confidence, impeding economic growth, and potentially leading to lower standards of living. It can result in reduced tax base, with fewer high-income earners contributing to the fiscus. The GDP would drop, potentially causing policy changes that include increasing tax rates. The fall of the rand, as we've seen already, could continue to occur. The Refugee Policy or Executive Act and US aid cuts have triggered volatility in the currency markets. Continued uncertainty could force the Reserve Bank to adjust interest rates to stabilize the rand. Potential investors may view the political risks associated with land reform and international controversy as a deterrent, leading to decreased foreign direct investment. The US actions have exacerbated existing tensions between the two countries. The South African government has criticized the US refugee policy as politically motivated and based on misinformation. This diplomatic strain may deter foreign investment and complicate trade relations, further impacting South Africa's economic outlook. These tensions are palpable across South Africa, especially after the first group of immigrants have arrived in the US. Many factors contribute to rising concerns among citizens, come into focus when considering the potential fallout. The US framing of Afrikaners as a persecuted minority could inflame racial sensitivities and further drive racial polarization in our country. Majority of Black South Africans view the refugee designation as a dismissal of their historical grievances and the need for land reform, while some white South Africans might feel vindicated or further alienated from the national project of reconciliation. Opposition parties and civil society may use the situation to criticize or defend the government's policies, potentially polarizing public opinion further. Persistent global scrutiny could provide sufficient pressure and may prompt the South African administration to further clarify or amend land reform policies. Better defining of the implementation of Expropriation Without Compensation Act can ensure legal and institutional safeguards to avoid perceptions of arbitrary or racially motivated action. Conversely, we may be witnessing the reinforcement of our national identity. The backlash could galvanize domestic support for sovereignty and the land reform process, reframing it as a continuation of the decolonization process. The U.S. decision to grant refugee status to white South Africans, primarily Afrikaners, and to suspend aid to South Africa has elicited a spectrum of international reactions, reflecting divergent perspectives on the policy's motivations and implications. Currently, our country's relationship with the U.S. is quite strained. The consequences of these recent events may erode trust and cooperation between the two countries, affecting bilateral agreements, trade, and security partnerships. South Africa may respond by aligning more closely with other BRICS members, reducing Western influence in Southern Africa. South Africa's international image could suffer if perceived as violating human rights, regardless of whether these accusations are substantiated or not. South African government officials have strongly criticized the U.S. actions, labeling them as politically motivated and based on misinformation. They argue that Afrikaners remain among the most economically privileged groups in South Africa, and that the portrayal of them as persecuted is misleading. The African Union have condemned the U.S. move as a neo-colonial attack on African sovereignty, while BRICS nations expressed their solidarity with its partner country, criticizing the U.S. decision as political interference. Groups like Human Rights Watch have warned that the U.S. policy could exacerbate racial tensions in South Africa and undermine the country's efforts to address historical injustices through land reform. Some Australian advocacy groups have called for their government to follow the U.S. example by offering refugee pathways to white South Africans, citing concerns over alleged discrimination and violence. However, this stance has sparked debate about immigration policies and criteria for refugee status. Prominent Afrikaner groups such as Free Forum and the Solidarity Movement have publicly declined the U.S. resettlement offer, asserting their commitment to remain in South Africa and contribute to its future. They have expressed concerns that the U.S. actions could inflame racial tensions and misrepresent the situation of Afrikaners in the country. Many white South Africans have voiced apprehension that the U.S. policy may lead to increased racial polarization. Some have even criticized the U.S. decision as uninformed and potentially harmful to South Africa's social cohesion. South Africans question why little is being done to address the confusion regarding what the Land Expropriation Act really entails. A lot of South Africans are taking the bill at face value, which isn't necessarily wrong. If one had to look back, the bill hasn't changed much since its inception. Some citizens are asking for open discussion and debate, especially in polarizing areas. They want answers to burning questions, the most important being, in what scenario can land be taken, and the legal owner receive no compensation? What kind of land qualifies and why? As well as the purpose for the seizure of said land. Some analysts have pointed out that it would have been better to provide aid in other ways. More resources to counter the specific problem of farm murders in South Africa, such as funding for personnel, or even technological resources, to aid in preventing or tracking these incidents. Now, after much research, we came across the portal that grants access to the necessary application forms you would need to complete in order to be considered for the program. It is relatively short and one must read through carefully before inputting any personal information. You can find the links to the official embassy website and the application form in the description below. I also implore you to conduct your own research before filling out any application. As of now, the U.S. refugee policy allowing white South Africans, particularly Afrikaners, to apply for resettlement in the United States, is limited, highly selective, and controversial. This is not a general open program for mass emigration. However, here is what we know and what steps you can consider if you're seeking to apply. This refugee policy is not a public, blanket application process like traditional immigration or diversity visas. It is reportedly being administered via discrete channels, often involving referral through advocacy or legal groups that work with U.S. immigration attorneys or political allies. Up until recently, the U.S. government had not officially published guidelines on how you can directly apply under this specific refugee route. To apply under U.S. refugee or asylum law, you must prove a few things first. A well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. That your government cannot or will not protect you from that persecution. But it must be of note that general crime or economic hardship does not usually qualify. You would need documented proof of targeted persecution. The proof includes death threats, attacks, or discrimination specifically because of your race, religion, or political affiliation, as well as government complicity or indifference to these threats. Please remember, do not attempt to enter the U.S. illegally expecting refugee status. This can lead to detention and permanent inadmissibility. Avoid scams. No agent or organization can guarantee refugee status. Be wary of anyone charging large fees promising U.S. asylum. And finally, understand that this policy has sparked major controversy in both the U.S. and South Africa, and it is not universally accepted. At the end of the day, it is clear that the U.S. refugee policy concerning white South Africans has sparked a complex array of reactions, highlighting tensions between domestic policies, international relations, and the global discourse on race and historical justice. As always, thank you for watching this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay informed.